Hey all. Um, this is probably one of my favorite topics for sure. Obviously, restorative justice is one of my favorite topics, but in particular, conflict. So, one of our first principles is being conflict aware, or kind of this idea that conflict happens. We make the mistake so often of not really talking about or defining or really kind of putting parameters around what it is that we're talking about when we're talking about conflict happens. So, I challenge us to use this language. Conflict is not an experience between two people. Conflict is an individual experience. Conflict is how I feel I am in conflict because I have expectations about the way the world should or could be. And that's what is driving that emotion in me. It's the experience of wanting something or hoping for something or expecting something, and then the outcome is different. The importance of this is because while we think about conflict so often as an interdependent, like there has to be two people involved, if we do that, if we limit ourselves to that sort of thinking, then we have this sort of circumstances where we don't have the language to talk about intrapersonal conflict or kind of the conflict that I experienced through the system. So first off, really easy interpersonal conflict, right? Like I have an expectation of you and you don't meet that expectation. And so I'm experiencing something, right? I have that, whether it's outward or whether I'm expressing that or not, I still have that feeling, right? And especially for young people who don't feel comfortable telling that other person or fearing judgment because I'm calling you out for whatever reason, right? I still have that conflict, whether it's outward or not, whether they know or they don't know. So that's a super important uh, first idea, which is conflict is individual experience. So the interpersonal conflict looks often like two people arguing, but they actually have expectations that are not lining up, and they're expressing them in pretty aggressive ways sometimes. Anyways, there's all kinds of things like that. And then there's times when I have conflict with somebody else and I'm not expressing it, but I still have that feeling, and that's really frustrating. And then there's a ton of work that's really, really interesting around the intrapersonal conflict, right? I have conflict with myself. I have beliefs about how I should be, whether it's I should be better looking, or I should be richer, or I should drive a nicer car, or I should be better at my job, or I should be a better parent, or I should do this, or I should have done that. Oh man, I really should have went to this university instead of that university. I really should have taken this job instead of that job. All that shoulding on ourselves, all that shoulding on ourselves, right, gets in our own way, right? And it nurtures and grows and kind of fosters all that negative emotion that's in us about being not good enough, not being worthy enough, not being enough, the anxiety, what if somebody knows, what if somebody sees that I should or shouldn't do this. All those types of things are all just under that conflict umbrella. And so when we're good at identifying what's going on for both ourselves and for young people, we give them the tools, and we give ourselves the tools to do this work. So before I leave you, I want to make sure that was two types of conflict, right? Inter and intra, right? Conflict with others, interpersonal, and then conflict with myself, intrapersonal. And then there's this level of systemic conflict where it's not anybody in particular's fault, right? But it's a problem, and it raises up a lot of pain and frustration and discontent, and it comes out in lots of different ways. But when we can identify it, then we're like, oh yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. So so kind of low level stuff when we're talking about systems, like I was talking about traffic. I have an expectation that traffic's going to take me X amount of time, and or traveling between this point and this point, will take me this amount of time. And due to traffic, or due to bus schedules, or due to the light rail running slow, or there's some sort of accident or problem on a light rail that delays that. And so I'm 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes late, right? We live in Seattle up here, and so we have notoriously bad traffic going north-south. There's a couple like big spots that will take 15, 20 minutes to get through during rush hour, or add 15 minutes to your travel. And so those types of things, I'm not mad at anybody in particular, right? I'm not mad at myself. I mean, maybe I shooting at myself, like I should have left earlier or whatever to give myself more time. But I'm actually like really frustrated with the system of roads and mass transit and other things like these system level things. Why haven't we invested in this, and why haven't we kind of put the money into things that we really like value? And so that's some sort of systems level, like low level kind of stake stuff. And then of course, there's all this like much more systemic or harmful or like current, I guess, current issues around racism, sexism, issues of national origin and things like that. So if you feel like I want things to be different, I want folks of color to be able to interact with the police in ways that don't like impact them in horrendous ways, ending up people getting shot and people getting arrested and thrown around and searched at much higher rates, when they were doing stop and frisk, or being able to predict economic outcomes because of the zip codes people live in, those types of things. Seeing women not get the same pay, the same amount of pay, or being sort of excluded from job opportunities because of their gender non-conforming folks, queer folks who are excluded from either marriage equality or jobs and positions of influence and power because of the way they present or the people that they love. Those are all like big systemic issues. And those, I think, should drive a lot of discontent and frustration and energy coming from myself or from you into the world. And I think the challenge is when we just think about it as like, oh, I'm so mad. Like what's really going on is I have an expectation that things would be fair and just in the world, that we would all be able to communicate and connect in ways that would promote, I'm a service member, I think about America a lot as an organization or as a unit. And I think that that's important, at least for me. But what does it mean? And I think to some degree it means justice, and to some degree it means like equity and opportunity for folks. And when I don't see those things happening, there's that sort of, I have an expectation of how the world I would like things to be, and it's not that way. And so what do I do with that energy, right? Do I go out on my street corner and yell and scream? Do I donate money to organizations that are doing this work, or do I do this work myself? Do I take equity, racial equity, gender equity, kind of national origin stuff, so socioeconomic status, like in the forefront of my work? That's really like the question, the first question at least, and then the second question is like, how do you navigate that, and what sort of strategies do you use? So when I think about conflict, I think about these three things: intrapersonal conflict, interpersonal conflict, and the systemic conflict. All these things reside in me. All these things are expectations that I have of the world. Sometimes, I think this is key, and I might end on this, I'm not sure. It's important to recognize that we have wrong expectations. We have expectations that kids are going to come to school and they're going to have a pencil and they're going to have a pen and they're going to have all this stuff. They're going to be fed and well loved and slept well and all this other stuff. Those are wrong expectations. And so when I think about my expectations about systemic issues, right, I need to think about like, is this a legitimate expectation? Is this okay for me to have? That people should be able to seek asylum in this country and not spend 2 years of their life in a detention center? I would say, yeah. I would say that's a legitimate expectation, that this country can do that. And So when we think about like schools and classrooms, what expectations do we have of young people that are unrealistic? And sometimes they are realistic and kids aren't meeting those expectations. This is not about not having expectations. It's about recognizing what's going on for me when I have those expectations. Are those expectations realistic? Are those expectations fair? Are those the same expectations that I should have of everybody? Well, of course not. And so managing those expectations, thinking about them, being reflective about them is the first step. I encourage you just to think about, like in your daily life, what expectations do you have? What things that really piss you off? And then why do I have those expectations? Are those fair? Are those things that I want to put energy into? Because they are driving my behavior, they are driving my thinking. And so for me, I need to be like, those things are important, those things aren't important, and I'm going to get rid of those expectations or minimize their influence on my life. And remember, like, this restorative work is not about just schools. It's not about just the justice system. Those expectations that suck, those expectations that don't feed my joy in the world and are I can't control, like, I need to really be thinking about, like, are those things that I want to have energy around, or want to give energy to. So thank you very much. I hope this is helpful. We'll see.